The moon hung high in the velvety night sky, casting an ethereal glow over the quiet streets of Oak Ridge. It was a small town, the kind where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Tonight, however, the town's tranquility was about to shatter. Malcolm Hayes, a 32-year-old black man with a broad smile and a passion for fixing cars, had just closed up his auto repair shop for the day. The shop, a modest building tucked between a diner and a thrift store, had been his sanctuary for years. It was where he found solace, tinkering with engines and restoring life to worn-out vehicles. Growing up, Malcolm had always been fascinated by how things worked, spending countless hours with his late father in their garage, learning the intricacies of auto repair. Now, as a single father himself, he poured his heart into the business, not just to make a living, but to create a legacy for his 8-year-old daughter, Amara. Every dent he hammered out, every engine he repaired, was a step toward securing her future. Tonight, as he locked up and turned off the shop's neon sign, a mix of pride and exhaustion settled over him. Little did he know, his world was about to be upended. The hum of his old Ford pickup filled the air as he made his way home, eager to see his 8-year-old daughter, Amara. She always waited up for him, even when he worked late. The thought of her beaming face warmed his heart. As he approached the intersection of Maple and 4th, flashing red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. A sigh escaped his lips as he pulled over. Routine traffic stops were nothing new to him, especially in a town where being black often meant standing out. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. Officer Darren Blake, a wiry man with a stern expression, approached the driver's side, while Officer Ryan Calloway, stockier and visibly younger, hung back. Malcolm rolled down his window, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel.
"Evening, officers,"
Malcolm said, keeping his tone polite but guarded.
"License and registration."
Officer Blake demanded curtly, shining his flashlight into the truck. Malcolm complied, handing over the documents.
"May I ask what this is about?"
"Your taillight's out."
Blake replied without looking up from the papers. Malcolm frowned. He'd checked his truck that morning, and everything was in working order.
"I'll get that fixed first thing tomorrow,"
he said calmly. Blake's eyes narrowed.
"Step out of the vehicle."
Confused, Malcolm hesitated.
"Is something wrong?"
I said, "Step out of the vehicle."
Blake repeated, his voice hardening. Calloway moved closer, one hand resting on his holstered gun. Malcolm's heart raced as he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out. He raised his hands slightly to show he meant no harm.
"Officers, I don't understand what..."
Before he could finish, Blake grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back.
"You match the description of a suspect in a robbery."
Blake said.
"What? That's impossible. I've been at my shop all day."
Malcolm protested, wincing in pain. Calloway pulled out a pair of handcuffs.
"Stay still."
Malcolm's protests fell on deaf ears as the cold metal encircled his wrists. A crowd began to gather, neighbors peeking out of windows and stepping onto porches. Whispers and murmurs spread like wildfire.
"What's going on here?"
A voice called out. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who lived nearby. Her gray hair framed a face etched with concern.
"Just doing our job, madam."
Blake replied dismissively. As Malcolm was shoved into the back of the patrol car, he caught sight of Mrs. Jenkins' worried expression. Her eyes met his, silently promising she'd get to the bottom of this. The Oak Ridge Police Department buzzed with activity as Malcolm was booked and placed in a holding cell. He sat on the cold bench, his mind racing. How had a routine traffic stop turned into this nightmare? He thought of Amara and the promise he'd made to always come home to her. Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them away. He had to stay strong. The following morning, Malcolm's sister, Jada, arrived at the station with attorney Marcus Reed. Marcus was a seasoned lawyer known for taking on civil rights cases. His sharp suit and commanding presence exuded confidence.
"This is a mistake. My client is innocent, and I demand to see the evidence against him."
Marcus said firmly to the desk sergeant. Blake appeared, holding a folder.
We have surveillance footage from a gas station robbery last night. The suspect matches his description.
Marcus's eyes narrowed as he examined the footage. The grainy video showed a man with a similar build to Malcolm, wearing a hoodie. The suspect's face was obscured.
This is hardly conclusive. My client has an alibi. He was at his shop all evening, and we can provide witnesses to prove it.
Marcus said. Blake's lips thinned.
We'll see about that.
As the days passed, the case gained national attention. Protesters filled the streets of Oak Ridge, chanting slogans and holding signs that read, "Justice for Malcolm and End Racial Profiling." Local news stations broadcast live footage of the rallies, where speakers from civil rights organizations condemned the systemic racism evident in Malcolm's arrest. One evening, a candlelight vigil was held outside the courthouse, with hundreds of attendees holding candles and sharing stories of similar injustices. Malcolm's auto shop became a makeshift headquarters for supporters, where volunteers organized petitions and fundraisers. The growing tension even caught the attention of national media outlets, with reporters swarming the town to cover the story. Interviews with Malcolm's family and community members painted a vivid picture of a man unjustly accused, while debates on talk shows and news panels brought the issue of racial profiling to the forefront of public discourse. Oak Ridge, once a quiet town, had become a symbol of a broader fight for justice and equality. Civil rights activists descended on Oak Ridge, holding rallies and demanding justice for Malcolm. The town became a powder keg, with tensions simmering between those who supported the police and those who believed Malcolm was a victim of racial profiling. In the courtroom, the trial began. Prosecutor Linda Garner painted Malcolm as a career criminal, citing minor infractions from his past. Marcus countered with evidence of Malcolm's good character, calling witnesses who vouched for his whereabouts on the night of the robbery. The turning point came when Jada took the stand.
My brother is a hard-working man and a devoted father.
She said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes.
He'd never do what he's being accused of.
As the trial progressed, cracks began to appear in the prosecution's case. The gas station clerk, who initially identified Malcolm as the robber, admitted under cross-examination that he'd only seen the suspect for a few seconds.
I'm not sure anymore.
He confessed. Then came the bombshell. Marcus presented evidence that the officers had a history of targeting black residents. Internal emails revealed Blake's racist remarks, and body cam footage from previous stops showed a pattern of misconduct. The courtroom erupted in gasps as Marcus delivered his closing argument.
This case is not just about Malcolm Hayes. It's about a system that allows prejudice to thrive. We must hold those in power accountable and ensure justice is served.
He said, his voice ringing with conviction. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, not guilty. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the foreperson read the decision. Malcolm clutched the edge of the defense table, his heart pounding in his chest. The words "not guilty" reverberated in his mind, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. Across the aisle, the prosecution team exchanged grim looks, their carefully constructed case unraveling in the face of justice. The jurors, a diverse group of men and women, avoided eye contact with both sides as they filed out of the room, visibly weary from the weight of their decision. Judge Whitaker thanked the jury for their service, acknowledging the difficulty of the case, before dismissing them. The gavel's sharp crack signaled the end of the trial, but for those involved, it was only the beginning of a new chapter. As Malcolm turned to embrace his sister Jada, tears spilled down his face.
"We did it,"
he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Marcus Reed, standing beside them, placed a reassuring hand on Malcolm's shoulder.
This isn't just a win for you, Malcolm. It's a win for everyone who's been fighting against injustice.
In the gallery, supporters erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the courthouse. The sound spilled out into the streets, where a crowd had gathered, awaiting the verdict. When word reached them, a wave of celebration swept through the assembly. Strangers hugged each other, and chants of justice for Malcolm filled the air. Meanwhile, Officer Blake, standing at the back of the courtroom, clenched his jaw, his face a mask of barely concealed frustration. His partner, Calloway, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the piercing gazes of reporters already closing in for comments. As Malcolm stepped outside, he was met with a sea of supporters holding signs and chanting his name. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in his direction, but he paused, taking a moment to absorb the scene.
I'm grateful for everyone who stood by me. This isn't just about me. It's about fighting for a system that treats everyone fairly. We still have a lot of work to do,
He said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind around him, and tears streamed down Malcolm's face as he embraced Jada and Marcus. Outside the courthouse, supporters cheered, their voices echoing through the streets. But the fight wasn't over. Marcus vowed to file a civil suit against the police department, demanding reforms to prevent future injustices. For Malcolm, the scars of the ordeal would take time to heal, but he found solace in the knowledge that he'd stood up for himself and his community. As he tucked Amara into bed that night, she looked up at him with wide eyes.
Daddy, are the bad guys gone now?
He smiled softly, brushing a curl from her forehead.
Not all of them, sweetheart, but we're working on it.
To everyone watching this story unfold, let this be a reminder: change begins with us. Injustice thrives when good people remain silent. Whether it's standing up for a neighbor, marching for a cause, or simply having the courage to speak the truth, your actions matter. Remember, progress is not achieved overnight, but through persistence, unity, and unwavering belief in equality and fairness. Let Malcolm's story inspire us all to confront prejudice, challenge broken systems, and build a future where justice is not a privilege, but a right for everyone. Together, we can and will make a difference